Welcome to Manage to Engage, the podcast from clearandopen.com, dedicated to the evolution of you because businesses grow when people do. Serving leaders, managers, and people who will be, helping you reach excellence in your work and achieve your personal goals at the same time. Sign up for the free course at clearandopen.com. I think that the ego will not be able to deconstruct or let go or surrender if you can't honor all of the good of it. What you resist persists. Our egos are what have gotten us to where we are today, and they will not get us where we want to go tomorrow. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for tuning in to Manage to Engage, the podcast from clearandopen.com. The ego gets a bad rap, but it's essential to both our personal and societal development. So let's have some gratitude for and acknowledge the good that our egos bring. Not often appreciated. Our egos got us where we are today, but we also need to understand that they will not get us where we want to go tomorrow, both as individuals and as a species. There's a final stage of maturation that many people never see, maturing beyond the ego. But it isn't talked about in any mainstream kind of common way. So even if this is your first introduction to the concept, you're probably ahead of the curve just by listening to this episode. I offer weekly member webcasts, online courses, and mentorship at clearandopen.com because it's my truth that with the right tools, anyone can eliminate the people, money, and time problems holding them back in business. And I share parts of these webcasts and courses on this show because I want to help you too. If you're enjoying the show and learning from it, I'd love your feedback. If you're listening to the show on an Apple device, all you have to do is open the podcast app, view the full description of this episode, and click the link to leave a rating and review for the show. Thanks very much for listening. Let's start the show. Any requests for today? I thought we'd talk about maturing out of ego. We could also talk about pistachios.
Maturing out of ego sounds just along the lines of what I'd like. And that meditation, Joseph, was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
The surrender was really, really wonderful.
Yeah. Well, it sort of fits with, that's sort of what I do these days on Tuesdays. I have it's sort of a figure eight. Sometimes I have an idea of what to talk about. And then the meditation is sort of a experience of sort of backing into it. And other times I have no idea what we're going to talk about, and I just let the meditation tell me. This time I've been thinking a lot about maturing out of ego and the trickiness of it. It's, of course, I didn't invent the idea, but it very much fits the thrival to flow movement, which is very much up for both of you, I would say. And how tricky it is in our conditioning, because so much of maturation, the way it's held for us, is really about the polishing of the ego. It's the teenage phase, begins at 13 or so and lasts however long it lasts, doesn't end at 20. If only that were the case, we would have a really different world. But, the development of the ego is a necessary phase of consciousness. And, the ego in many models gets quite vilified. And it's a long story why that's not helpful and accurate. But the short version of it is the light side of the ego. You guys know what the light side of the ego is? Why? What is the healthy aspect of ego? Why do we have it, right? If it's so problematic, why is it there in the first place?
Something about experiencing being human in the
mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that's the headline of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, infants are swimming in what's called in some forms of psychology, the Ouroboros, this undifferentiated sort of sea, right? They are their feelings. They are their environment. They don't distinguish. They don't have an eye, right? They don't distinguish between themselves and others. And so their agency in the world, their personal power is quite low, right? You can't really carve your way through the world, take care of yourself, be responsible, make things happen, if you don't have a differentiated sense of I, right? So we need to learn where we end and other people begin. Now, this sounds obvious in one way, like, of course, but can you imagine if you never developed a sense of separate self? Right? What would that even look like? If you confused, and some people do, it's not, depending on personality type and all that. Sometimes, Enneagram 9s, for example, are famous for having difficulty distinguishing between their feelings and other people's feelings. Imagine if that were like 100 times more difficult. That would be very confusing. If you felt hunger and it was actually the person standing next to you who was hungry, right? Imagine, it would be chaos, right? I think I need to sleep. And you just woke up. Oh no, that's the person next to me on the bus. Right? So we need to develop this sense of separate self, and that sense of separate self begins, between the ages of like 3 and 5, and continues for like the next 15 years, right? The teenage years, the rebellion is a lot about pushing away. Well, I don't necessarily agree with mom and dad, and here's what I think. And there's all this creation of independence. And 20s, there's a lot of experimentation. Quite a lot of our lives is contexted by and driven by this need for individuality. And that's a good thing. But for most people, it never ends, because the shadow side of the ego turns that project into a kind of holy grail. Well, I must become more individual. I must become more free. The path to my salvation, my liberation, has to do with me achieving my goals, getting what I need. And so all of that is based in the truth that began at, age 3, 4, 5. But it's like a cycle that never realized it needed to complete, like a booster rocket that never realized it had gotten from A to B and couldn't get the rocket from B to C, but keeps trying. See, so if you see the ego, the sense of separate self, as a necessary phase, a necessary and healthy phase of development, just like crawling, but a 28-year-old person who's still crawling around, you would be like, well, I get that at one point in your life, crawling was really the best thing for you, but I'm not so sure it's serving you anymore, right? Or, liquid food, right? Maybe there's someone in the world who just never developed a taste for solid food. They just wanted to stay on the nipple, in whatever way, and just wanted it. Yeah, I don't see the good thing about chewing. It's so much easier to have it sort of pre-digested, right? We look at all these things, even sexual experimentation, drug experimentation, irresponsibility experimentation. We look at these things and we see like, okay, these are reasonable. A teenager needs to screw up and to learn about the consequences of their actions. I'm thinking about like the extreme weather. There's been a lot of it. California is getting crazy amounts of rain. Lots of it has gotten like 3/4 of the 2019's normal rain already, and it's not even the end of February. Here in Maui, we had 3 inches of snow on Haleakala, which still sticking. Like snowing up there, okay, that happens every once in a while, but staying for multiple days, that's bizarre. And I'm just thinking how teenage it is for we as a species to be trying to solve the climate change problem at the last minute. I mean, it's really, in context, it's no different than staying up all night to get the homework done, like that's what it is. Like, we've known the assignment has been due for like 20 years, right? The climate science has been coming in for a long time, decades, warnings, all the way back to, I think, Jimmy Carter, right? We've had data since then. No, I'll do it. I'll handle it later. We'll handle it later. We'll handle it later. We'll handle it later. And then suddenly, It's due tomorrow. Might be too late. I mean, that's really like where it's at. The entire species, perhaps, we can't absolutely know, but it's like that's how bad it's having to get. We're having to actually feel the deadline. It's almost like we're having to walk in the classroom and have the teacher say, "Where's your homework?" That's how tight we're playing it. And that's entirely teenage, right? That's an immature form of behavior. It's knowing something needs to be done and sort of wrestling, well, maybe it's not really true. Maybe the data is not true. Maybe. And even if it's not true, right? We already know there's a finite amount of oil. So it's just a resistance to change, right? It's a stubbornness. Even if humans aren't affecting climate change at all, which is of course possible, maybe the correlation is not causation, right? But still, that's the thing that's like, and it's a teenage thing to be even having the argument, well, I don't believe that human beings are causing climate change. Okay, well, is there an infinite amount of oil? Of course not. It's not an infinite amount of anything on this planet, right? So why don't we look at alternative forms of energy? Well, because it's a Chinese hoax trying, like it's just, you see how immature the whole conversation is, right? And so anywhere you look in our world, you can see that kind of egotistical behavior. And egotistical usually means self-centered, but not necessarily immature behavior, right? So the challenge for the species is to realize that there's still, and for, as a species as a whole, and then of course each of us as individuals, is to ask that question, where are we still stuck in a necessary but less mature phase of development? And if you frame whatever personal issues you have, business challenges, whatever those challenges are, what if you were to frame it as, this is pain that is pointing to an aspect of ego that is holding on to being ego. I think often of, I had a friend of a friend who was a general counsel in a, big San Francisco company and was sharing a toothbrush with her 14-year-old daughter, right? There's a phase of development not exceeded there. There's like, I could see sharing a toothbrush with a kid at a certain age, sort of like sharing a bed, right? But at a certain point, it starts to kind of feel a little weird. And you'd immediately wonder, like, what else is going on in the relationship between mother and daughter that is stagnative? Fights they have, conflicts they have, I would imagine a lot of that kind of stuff. So, if you just frame, and the tricky thing about maturing out of ego is it's not a doing, right? Because the ego development is very much a doing. It's a constructive process. It's here's what I believe. Okay, here are my beliefs. These are my values. Okay, these are my values. This is what I want to do for work. This is the kind of life I want to have. This is how I'm going to make that happen. And the ego is where all of that is born, or at least sort of transacted, right? The creation of a resume and how you show yourself. You have to have a self-image to do a job interview well. Unless you're interviewing to be a Zen monk or something, right? They want to know, tell me about yourself. And if you have nothing to say about yourself because you're so free of your self-image, you're probably not going to get that job, right? You need a self-image. Having a self-image is important. What kinds of things do you like to do? The woman asks you on your first date. We're supposed to be able to look at ourselves and talk about our personality, right? That's all ego phase development. And again, I think it's really important to see the positives of it, the light side of it, because in so much misinterpretation of transcendental philosophy, the ego gets so vilified, like it's something that has to be stamped out. First of all, that it's even a thing, that could be stamped out. It's not a thing; it's a process. It's a verb more than it is a noun, and I think that the ego will not be able to deconstruct or let go or surrender if you can't honor all of the good of it. What you resist persists. So our egos are what have gotten us to where we are today. And they will not get us where we want to go tomorrow, depending on what you want, of course. But it seems to me it's intrinsic in life somehow. It's somehow by design that there's this final phase of maturation that most of us don't see. It's not talked about in any kind of mainstream way. And that is the maturing beyond ego. That is a letting go of one's personality, a holding of one's beliefs, values, opinions in a much looser way. Being able to get along with more kinds of people, not suffering over not getting what one wants. Because that's the sort of trip, the hook of ego is this individual sense of power that we develop. It's so seductive, right? And in the Tony Robbins sort of paradigms of the world, the personal power development, it's like focus your intention and be clear and do this work and you can have whatever you want, right? And this is extremely seductive to the ego and extremely necessary. And there's truth to it, right? Planning and goals and hard work and all of that. It's a necessary phase. But what you usually find is at a certain point, either of two things happens. Either you find that focus, that intention, that hard work doesn't get you where you want to go. Or perhaps worse, it does get you where you want to get to. And you realize you're still miserable. Right? So the joke is sort of on us because what you realize in the end is actually that the ego is not capable of fulfilling you. That's been the promise all along, right? It's like that the egoic aspect, the individualistic aspect, that we actually know what we want and how to get it. And I think it's part of the maturation process is because no one can tell you that. You have to experience that. You go after those things. And like I say, in the thrival mode, that's entirely useful and necessary. Go after those things. Go get what you think you want. Marry the kind of person you think you want to marry. And then you'll find out, right, how wrong you were. And you will learn more from that pain than reading every book in the world, right? It's totally necessary. And then I think that happens enough times where we start to get this self-reflective sort of meta where we go, some part of me keeps steering me in the wrong directions. And that's a key moment, I think, in the maturation out of ego, where we start to healthily mistrust ourselves and realize that something's actually not working. And that's the beginning of a letting go, the beginning of surrender, the beginning of a beginning.
Thanks for listening to Manage to Engage, the Clear and Open podcast. Join us next week when you'll be a little bit closer to who you're destined to be. Until then, know that Clear and Open is dedicated to the evolution of you, because businesses grow when people do. If you want to help the show grow, I'd appreciate you leaving a rating and review on iTunes. All you have to do is open the Apple Podcasts app, view the full description of the episode, and click the link to leave a rating and review. Or you can go to clearandopen.com/review and it will bring you to the right place. If you're looking for more support on your journey, head over to clearandopen.com for even more tools, articles, and free resources. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.